I'm sure they ask you this. Oh, who's your favorite artists?
Yeah.
And I got fed up with answering that because it depends.
Yeah.
But I figured out, okay, I'll go with Louis Armstrong, Emmylou Harris.
Kind of get your star answer.
Yeah. Muddy Waters, Louis Armstrong, and Solomon Burke. And they say, who's Solomon Burke?
Okay.
Solomon Burke was this enormously overweight, 500-pound soul singer with just such a great voice. And I'm in the lobby of the hotel at the Edmonton Festival. And Solomon's road manager, one of his children, he had 21 children. His daughter Elizabeth is the road manager, and she's got some hapless volunteer. Excuse me, do you have the red roses for tonight? Red roses? Yeah, with 3 dozen red roses. Do you have a red carpet? Yeah, do you have the silver vases? Have you read the Ryder? No. Well, okay, we need 3 dozen red roses, thorns must be removed. We need 2 silver vases, we need red carpet on the stage, and we need a throne. And the poor guy, and she said very firmly, these must be in place by the time the show happens, otherwise Dr. Burke will not perform. So total panic, and they get all this shit together. Solomon needs the throne because, first of all, he's too heavy to stand up for a whole show, and he did call himself the king of rock and soul, so you need a throne.
Naturally.
So the show, well, I saw him do the gospel workshop on Sunday afternoon, and he married a couple in the middle of the gospel workshop. Anyway, so the show is huge. The band is enormous. There's 4 horn players, 3 backup singers, piano, bass, drums, keys, and a concert harpist, and center stage, the throne. And the band hits this song called Everybody Needs Somebody to Love. And if you go on YouTube and put in Solomon Burke Rolling Stones, he is singing it with the Stones. So Solomon eventually, after the band plays this riff ad nauseam, and now the king, and Solomon even then hesitates before he comes out. And he's wearing a floor-length red velvet cape with white fur trim. And inside, there's these little plastic holders, each one with a silver dollar coin. And he has $400 sewn onto the inside of the cape.
That he wears on stage?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, he doesn't. He comes on wearing it. Everybody in the band is dressed in black except one guy in pink. And his job is to walk behind Solomon, take the cape, spin it off stage.
Which I believe the story goes, James Brown eventually stole this,
this
stagecraft.
Yeah, there's stories about the two of them. But what happened, I remember afterwards being in Solomon's trailer and saying, because I'd met him in 1990, I'd brought him to Toronto for something called the Southern Comfort Blues, which lasted 3 years. And I said, the thing with the cape was great. He said, yeah, but back in the day, in the old days, we had a dwarf in the band called Little Sammy. And Sammy'd walk behind me under the cape. I would drop the cape, I would go to the throne, and the cape would just go off stage. People, what? Who would guess there's a midget under here, invisible to the audience, who is crawling off stage with the cape covering him? I mean, they don't do that kind of shit anymore, do they? Pity. Solomon was the most warm-hearted, generous, crazy dude. He had 21 kids. He years ago, a friend of mine asked me to go to a blues festival in Fort Lauderdale. And they didn't give me any money, but they paid my fare and my hotel, and I had to host a workshop. And I said, well, I could do that. That's fine. I said, but Solomon is headlining the show. Why don't we get him out in the afternoon, put him on stage, and I'll interview him, and we'll get stories, because he's a great storyteller. Well, I phoned Solomon's office, and he was in Europe, and then he phoned me back, and I was on vacation in Europe. So we never did connect. So I'm backstage in Florida, and there's a huge limo, and the front door, the shotgun seat is open, and Solomon is in there, like resplendent in all his 500 pounds. So he gestures me over. He says, "Why were you calling me?" I said, "Well," I sent the whole thing, and he said, "Well," he said, "that's all right," and that was the last I heard of it until he got on stage. Now, getting Solomon on stage, you black the stage out, curtains, you have a forklift truck. In Edmonton, they did it. It sat Solomon in a golf cart, the forklift truck lifts the golf cart, and so get him on stage. And in Florida, they had him on, those trucks that have the back moves up. Mm-hmm. Well, they had him in his wheelchair, and then behind the scenes, they cleared backstage, and Solomon finally he didn't do the walking on stage thing at that point. He was too large and too ill. And he does the first song, everybody, and it just rocks. And then he goes, "Easy." And then he did that old country song, "Put your sweet lips to the phone, Mr. Flohil." What? He fucking name checks me in front of 10,000 people, and the only person I knew was my friend Dick Waterman had left. I said, nobody knows that. Oh, well, there you go, Solomon. I'm sorry, I just stopped telling stories now.
So from the time that you started the magazine that was affiliated with SOCAN, or the precursor to SOCAN, you also spent a number of years as the editor for The Record, which became as a staple here in Canada for the music industry. How did that
David
happen?
Farrell, who
now runs FYI Music, ran The Record, and he enrolled myself and a colleague, friend, Larry LeBlanc, to, edit this thing. And I did record reviews. Like, I had something in every edition of that magazine for 17 years. Mm-hmm. Then, meanwhile, we'd started another magazine, or Al Mayer had started another magazine called Applaud. And Applaud was designed to promote Canadian music outside of Canada. Mm-hmm. Alas, both ventures foundered because we were at that odd place where the internet was happening but hadn't quite happened. Mm-hmm. In the case of Applaud, Al felt that we couldn't afford to do an online presence. Okay. The Record tried, but it was at that time. Now, FYI is only online, and it's a daily, 3 times a week guide to what's happening in the business, and is beginning to be quite successful financially, and certainly it's always been a must read for me at any rate. So both Applaud and The Record were victims of the change. Yeah. And we couldn't adjust to it or adapt to it fast enough. Mm-hmm. So, I just take this as it comes, and I look back and I write a press release and I send it to my list of X number of people. And I remember doing it in the old days where you would type it out and you would get it approved, and you'd change it for whatever it is. And then you would run off labels for all your people. Then you'd put them in an envelope, and then it's rather easier to do it now. Yeah, everything's pretty instant now. Yeah.
But those days it was a major undertaking just to do a simple press release.
What was your relationship like with the labels back then? Did you see them as friends or partners, or were you, or was it more of a combative journalistic relationship or some combination?
The record labels were the major part of the business. I mean, now and then there were 8 or 9 record labels, and now there are 3. And it's interesting to see that the independent sector of the business is growing considerably all the time.
There seems to be more indie labels of note now than ever before. Like now you have the Arts and Crafts, the 6 Shooters, the Dynalones, the 604s. Like there's probably over a dozen important indie labels in Canada now.
And the difficulty in the old days with the independent labels was that radio had, and I am not a fan of commercial radio, but radio had the idea that if it was not on a major label, it couldn't be any good. Because if it was any good, it would be on a major label. Well, that's cockeyed thinking, if there you go. But and there are the major labels did what they do. They had a lot of power and a lot of strength and a lot of money, and they could, with the right artist, bully their way. And the indies in those days were kind of floundering away, just working with their fan base of the artists that they represented. Now the indie labels have a lot to say, and they have a lot of strength. And even the artist-owned labels, now that people don't buy physical product. My friend Jenny Tai made a record, sold 1,000 copies, and in these trying times, for somebody on her own label with no major distribution, I talked to her the other day. She said, "Oh, I've just ordered another 1,000." And of course, she's selling them off gigs. And records, physical records now, are either a souvenir or a calling card, one or the other. I'm sad to see that change happening. I like physically having. I don't have a Spotify subscription. I'm sorry.
No.
But that's all right.
As we look around your apartment here, you have, I don't know, thousands, a couple
thousand at least. Yeah, at least. Yeah, they breed at night.
Yeah. I'm interested because now you are in the kind of publicist side of things. Yeah. But you also, like we've been talking about, have the experience on the music journalism side of things and an insight into labels and agents and all of that kind of stuff. How's the relationship between media and artist changed over particularly the last 10 to 20 years?
Oh, it's changed dramatically, and it's changed not because, radio depends on music, but a certain kind of music, and it's format driven and all the rest of it. Print media doesn't really matter anymore, and as print media has shrunk, you used to be able to buy the Globe or the Star or even, heaven help us, the Toronto Sun, and know that there would be a review of last night's concert. There would be record reviews. My friend Michael Barclay, who's a well-established author in journalism, a music commentator, had a record review column in the Kitchener-Waterloo for 20 years. They paid him $80 a week, and since nobody buys records anymore, somebody said, "Oh," and he got fired. And he said, it was very sad, and there's a folk music magazine called Penguin Eggs, and it still runs 8 pages of record reviews. And I said to the publisher, "Ron, what? Nobody buys records anymore, not even us, not even the quotes folk, the F word, as I call it. You should do something else with that space. Might just list the records that are out there. That would be a service."
Yeah. I've noticed, being a regular reader of music media, obviously, in particular album reviews, I've noticed the nature of the album review has changed. It used to be the review was the filter
between the industry and the fans saying this is worth listening to, this is worth your money. Yeah, exactly. Now it's more the reviewer is more of a provider of context and analysis. You know what I mean? It's
the point is there is so much music available, more and the harder it is, it seems, to break through and make a living at music, the more and more people than ever before are trying to do it, and obviously some of them. Sorry, can you pause it?
Sure, we'll pause here. Come back in a sec.
There's huge, and traditionally there's been huge genres of music that have gone over or under my radar. I think I have a Pink Floyd record. I think I played it once.
Yeah.
And it was, but that's but it. And now I've never heard Radiohead. I couldn't identify a Radiohead, which is appalling.
Yeah.
But when I say that to people, they say, well, I can list 100 artists they've not heard of either, because we have this massive amount of music to deal with, and nobody or very few people accept radio, but that plays only a very, very limited kinds of music. And I mean, is if Q107 or IQ of 7, as I sometimes call it, played Led Zeppelin, they played what, 2 tracks out of a band that made what, 4 or 5 albums?
Yeah. It was 6,
Come
7
on.
albums, something like that. Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
And they played 2 songs.
Yeah.
I never want to hear Stairway to Heaven ever again, along with other favorite songs I don't want to know about. Danny Boy.
The thing I always lament these days is that, like you said, there's this ocean of music, an absurd amount of music coming out every Friday, the new releases that all go to Spotify and Apple Music and blah, 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 all the streaming services. And what happens is there's so much great music that comes out. Like, there's constantly new stuff coming out that I like or I'm interested in. But what happens is, even when a new album, I was kind of mentioning this to you before we started doing the official interview here, but what happens is an album comes out, you hear it, like, oh, I really dig this. Maybe you listen to it 2 or 3 times, but then there's always something else and something else and something else. So compared to when I was younger, or buy the CD, because you have those limited amount of options in your collection, you buy a CD, you listen to it a ton, you know every nook and cranny. As soon as the song ends, you just instinctively know what's about to start back up. Nowadays, even my favorite album of the year, I might have only listened to 4 or 5 times in total. Know what I mean?
Yeah. It not only is that a factor, but you need gatekeepers to point you in the right, to even tell you. Like Paul Simon put out a record not that long ago, and he's an interesting songwriter I've always admired and liked. And I don't think anybody noticed that the record was even there. So, you have to be a major fan of somebody to keep up with just that one artist. And that one artist is, there were 15,000 albums released this year. How many did you listen to? It's impossible.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
But, music's there. It feeds the soul. It feeds your brain. And for me, I've always sort of, and I don't know where I got this from. I don't think I thought of it myself. But I think for music to reach me, it has to appeal to any 2 of the following: head, heart, groin, feet. Any 2 of those, and it'll be okay. If it's just one, it won't. And if, heaven help us, it's 3 or even 4, which is, then wow.
It's like your own personal version of the Maple CanCon requirements.
Yes, exactly. What was that? Brain, heart, groin, feet. Yeah. Yeah, we'll work on that.
I'm only realizing how long we've been talking. We should wrap it up soon, or else I could stay here all day.
Well, that's fine.
Something I should have just brought up maybe just to pump our own tires as Canadian musicians when we were talking about the record and your time as an editor and journalist, is that I brought you the 40th anniversary, the new copy of the latest issue of Canadian Musician, which is our 40th anniversary issue.
You know that I wrote the cover
That's
story?
what I was just about to bring up. You wrote the cover story on Burn Cummings for the very first issue of Canadian Musician, 1979.
See?
Do you remember that?
Vaguely. I tend to be like a very high-class sex worker. I write, they pay me, I forget it, and I do the next one. And I still do, I hate doing them, but I still do bios for artists. My friend Larry LeBlanc has what are we allowed to say? He has what he calls a fuck you price. Yeah. It's $750 and he'll write your bio. And of course everybody says, what? And passes. And if anybody says, okay, fine. My price is a little lower than that, but I do hate doing them.
Yeah.
I once did one years ago for Gordon Lightfoot. And it started out, Gordon Lightfoot put his cowboy boots on the coffee table and said something like that. Yeah. And he called me up, said, this bio, this won't do, we'll have to make some change. Oh, here comes heavy rewrite. Yeah. So he invites me to his house. I go to his house. He looks at the bio and he says, this thing about cowboy boots, I don't want people to think I'm a country shit kicker. I said, well, we can take that out. Yeah. What else? He said, that's it. Everything else is fine. It was the easiest rewrite I ever had to do. And I did a bio for Long John Baldry. And there is a great character, was a great character. And he did an album called Right to Sing the Blues. So I did the bio in the form of a court hearing in front of a judge, and he had to prove that he had the right to sing the blues. So that went into all the background and bio stuff, you know. There's a great John Baldry story. And
Sounds a lot better than the majority of bios I see. I get like countless album release emails every day that have bios, and I swear to God, at least 50% of them start off with like, you know, if Led Zeppelin and Radiohead had a baby, it would be, you know, that formula.
Joni Mitchell, right? I think there are various artists whose work I admire, but who have dozens of imitators. Yeah. Joni Mitchell is one, Stevie Wonder's another. Women artists tend, as a general group, either to be Joni-ish or Ani DiFranco-ish.
You've worked with Ani DiFranco too,
yes,
haven't you?
I did. It's a Mariposa story, but I was the artistic director. I knew who I wanted to have at the festival. And the fact that there were envelopes with 400 envelopes with tapes and bios, I didn't care. I didn't know who any of them were. Yeah. I didn't want to listen to any of them. I knew who I wanted. Yeah. And that, to some extent, is the case still today. Mm-hmm. And the directors of the festival said, no, Flo, you've got to listen to all this shit. So I listened to it all, and I chose two people. One of them was a black policeman from Jamestown, New York, who was playing, and this is way back, 90s, early 90s. And the idea of a black policeman playing acoustic blues at that period of time wasn't very common. Taj Mahal was the only person really doing that. And so I chose him. Mm-hmm. And then a friend of mine who was a newspaper reporter on the Buffalo Evening News called me up and said, do you remember me? And because when I was doing publicity, I'd given him, you know, press credentials and so on. I said, yeah, of course. He said, well, can I send you a tape and will you listen? I said, yep. And I did. And there was this 19-year-old girl from Buffalo who, apart from a coffee house appearance or two in New York City, had done nothing. Mm-hmm. And I listened to this and said, how the hell does a 19-year-old know this much? So I promptly hired Ani DiFranco, and it was the first time she played in Canada, and she started out and she stole the festival. Meanwhile, the other dude I'd hired was not only not very good, but he was a pain in the ass to deal with as well. So it's still a crapshoot, is what I'm saying, right? But that was interesting. Arnie. Oh, I just very briefly, and you're going to have to edit this or whatever, but I'll tell you the best Long John Baldry story. Long John Baldry was 6'7" tall. He always wore hats. He always wore stacked heel boots. So when you talk to John, "Hi, John, how are you?" You know, you're looking up there. And here's a footnote in the history of rock and roll. Because Elton John named himself after John Baldry, and after Elton Dean, who was, I think, the sax player or the trumpet player in the band at that time. Elton John at that time was Reg Dwight. Yeah. He was starting a solo career. He said, "I can't call myself that." So, and the other thing that Baldry is known for is discovering Rod Stewart. Oh. And he remained close friends with Rod Stewart.
Like pre-Faces, Rod Stewart?
Oh, pre-everything. Huh. I heard this young man playing harmonica on a platform in the tube. And he was playing from underneath a pile of football scarves. I said, "Young man, you should audition for my orchestra." I mean, that's how John would talk. Anyway, the story is that the two of them were in an Indian restaurant in Soho in London. And I know the restaurant. I've been in it, and it's very expensive and not very good. Anyway, never mind. And they stuffed themselves with food, and they packed up all that was left, and they stumbled out several sheets to the wind into the waiting limo. The limo took off. In the next intersection, it got T-boned by a truck who missed the plane, crash plane then. And Rod Stewart, when it all crash settles down, he's lying on the floor. He said, "John, I'm dying. I'm there's blood. I'm covered in blood." John said, "No, Roddy, that's not blood. That's my chicken vindaloo." I always loved that story. And John told me it, so it's okay.
Oh, my God.
But the people, it's the people that make this business. And, you know, apart from the star who is an asshole or whatever, there's always good people. Yeah. And I've had, from soup to nuts, from Lorena McKennitt to Ian Tyson to Crash Test Dummies to Muddy Waters to whatever. Yeah. And I look at them, and these are all people I met and know, and if they're still alive, and incredibly privileged to have known them and worked with them. Especially the one thing I think I can say is that I'm very good, and I always was, at picking out people who haven't happened yet in the very early stages of their career, and I did whatever it took to make them better known, and I may or may not have any involvement with them, although you may be good friends. And I made a list once of 26 artists that I'd worked with when nobody knew who they were. K.D. Lang, I saw the CBC.
So many of them. We've been talking for like an hour, and there's still so many of them that like we haven't even touched on, particularly newer people like Serena Ryder.
K.D., I saw the CBC show from the Vaults, and they had this lovely stuff of K.D. Lang on the Tommy Hunter show. I remember when I was working with K.D. and she was in her manic country phase, calling up the Tommy Hunter show. And basically they told me to go away and never call them again. There was no way they were interested in a stupid country girl, blah, 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 blah. And of course, 6 months later, 8 months later, they're on the phone. Can we get K.D. Lang? And it was the hardest thing I can remember doing, of not telling them where they could go and what they could do to themselves. Where the hell were they when this artist needed that?
Yeah.
Now, yeah. So I'm sometimes ahead of the curve,
Yeah.
And there's people I'm working with now in different ways. Jenny Tai, Michelle Rumball, Michelle is an interesting case because she's an artist who did have a bunch of success and then disappeared and now came back. There's a woman called Cat and the Queen, and I've never seen an artist like her. I just run my mouth off about how good she is, but she doesn't pay me to do that. I just do it because I've seen her, and she'll play my damn birthday party or else.
Which is the last thing. Well, there's so much more. I feel like we could talk all day here, but we do have to wrap it up at some point. So there's one more thing that you kind of just brought up there that I know you want to mention before we do, which is you have your 85th birthday party coming up in
85.
June.
Ain't that a kick?
And not just that you're turning 85, but you're doing something pretty cool for it. Do you want to?
Well, what I do every 5 years, I started this in 1970 when not 1970, when I was my 70th birthday, I did an event at Hughes Room with the Downchild Blues Band, a music comedy group called the Arrogant Worms, a young artist I just started to work with called Justin Rutledge, and Serena Ryder. The trouble was, there were great performances, but you can't have a party at Hughes Room. So I moved the whole thing to the Horseshoe. And this year, on June 28th, and it's open to the public, and anybody wants to come. And it's a benefit for Unison, which is a music industry charity that supports music. I'm paying it forward here.
We're big boosters of the Unison Benevolent Fund. Yeah.
Well, what I'm going to do is what I did the last time 5 years ago. I pay all the expenses of the party. I pay the house band. The other people come and just do what they do, a couple of songs, and they're there. I give the rest of the money to Unison, and I'll do the same again this year. So far this year, strange mix of people. Mary Margaret O'Hara came up to me the other night and said, can I play at your birthday? Yes, you can. Washboard Hank, Samantha Martin and Delta Sugar are the house band for everybody. I don't know who else. There's a list. There'll be about 18 performers and artists, and everybody will get drunk and eat bad food and have a good time.
Nice. Some people know who are watching or listening. Do they buy tickets beforehand, just pay at the door?
Well, both, obviously.
Yeah. Where do they find tickets?
Well, we haven't kind of figured that out yet.
All right.
It's going to be... Well,
let me, when you do, let me know and we'll share it out there.
Yeah, please. It'll be... I think we'll have tickets on sale in late April.
Okay, cool.
As soon as the talent lineup is confirmed.
All right, perfect.
Huh? Yeah, it's going to be fun.
No doubt. Rich,
if I make it, touch wood, no plastic or whatever these IKEA tables are made of.
Well, you're still kicking and you're still spry here, and your passion certainly hasn't abated here. So, Richard, like I said, I feel like I could just shoot the shit with you all day and keep just picking out stories. But so I guess that just means we have to do this again sometime. But
I'll tell you the world's quickest story. Sure. I do a workshop at festivals called War Stories, and I get musicians to tell. Yeah. And the best one and the shortest one came from a guy out of Alberta called Mike Plume. 30 years ago, he's touring Europe for the very first time. He and the band are in a sort of a pretty clapped out van with a driver that's been provided by the local promoter, and they're coming into Germany from Denmark. As they get to the German control point, 4 German tanks go rumbling through in the other direction, presumably some military exercise or something. And the driver says to the German guy, excuse me, but the radio in our van's broken. Is there a war? And the German guy says, maybe, but this time we did not start it. Bad joke to end the story with.
I think that's a great place to leave off. Richard, thank you for this. It's been a real pleasure.
My pleasure.